Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my pleasure and honor to have Rabbi Chaim Miller with us. Chaim Miller was educated at the Haberdashers' Aske's School in London, England, and studied medical science at Leeds University. At the age of 21, he first began to explore his Jewish roots in full-time Torah study. Less than a decade later, he published the best-selling Kol Menachem Chumash, Gutnick edition. I have no idea if I pronounced that properly, but
Perfect.
which made over 1,000 complex discourses on the late Lubavitcher Rebbe easily accessible to the layman. His 2011 compilation, The Lifestyle Books, Torah, 5 Books of Moses, Slogger Edition, was distributed to thousands of servicemen and women in the U.S. Army. In 2013, he was chosen by the Jewish press as one of 60 movers and shakers in the Jewish world. His latest works include Turning Judaism Outward, the first full biography of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the multi-volume Practical Tanya, which is incredible. I have the volume 1 right here in my hands, and it is incredible. It's a new standard in the translation of Hasidic thought for contemporary readers. Rabbi Chaim Miller lives in Brooklyn, New York, with his wife Hani and 7 children. Rabbi, it's so great to have you on the show.
Such a joy to be here.
So I have a lot to talk with you about. I've been getting so much great information and guidance on what to ask you over the course of the week. And I would love to start with a really sticky one that some people might want to turn off the episode right now because they don't believe in it, but reincarnation. And I know this is something that is not seen as Christian. It's not seen as part of Judeo-Christian religions. And it actually is part of Judaism. It's not just Hindu. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on reincarnation and thoughts that you want to share from the Tanya as well. Why we have reincarnation, how does it work? Is it worthwhile to go back into our past lives somehow through regression, hypnosis, etc.?
Let me just start by saying that I think Jewish spirituality is hugely underrated. A lot of people don't even know there's such a thing as Jewish spirituality. It's something that all the denominations of Judaism have in common. They all don't really teach it. So wherever you're going to go to a synagogue, it's not really taught very much. But there's a huge textual tradition of Jewish spirituality. There's also a living tradition, people practicing it, and so a lot of things we're going to talk about is in that. I just have a friend from Australia, a rabbinic friend, who told me that he had an audience with the Dalai Lama about 10 or 20 years ago. And he asked the Dalai Lama, like, when Jews come to you, why don't you send them to their tradition? Why do you kind of teach them Buddhism? He gave 2 replies. He said, first of all, they're coming to me. So if they had something in the Jewish tradition, they would have found it. And the second thing he said is that Western Buddhism is kind of run by Jews. So like the whole thing would fall apart if they didn't come to me. That anecdote kind of struck me very strongly of like how badly we are doing spreading this wisdom. So thank you for having me on today to try and in a little way redress that balance. Reincarnation is a very extensively documented belief in the Jewish tradition, particularly the Kabbalistic tradition, Jewish mysticism. The deeper questions are in the Kabbalah, which a lot of people have heard of. The idea behind this is that, we're never born with a blank slate. Just historically, we're all born into a certain context. Like Billy Joel said, we didn't start the fire. It's been burning since the world's been turning. Like you're born into a mess, basically. And the same thing is also like spiritually in terms of past existences. You don't come in with a clean slate with your soul either. You've been doing work in previous lives, either successfully or unsuccessfully, and you're usually coming back to work on something which you didn't get right before. The Jewish belief is that what you're really here to do is probably you won't enjoy it that much, or you'll find it hard because it's like a muscle that you've never used in any life. And you're coming back to do that particular thing. So everyone, like, how do I know? There are ways people you could do past life regressions. People use astrology to find out their information about their past lives. Or some people just kind of have intuition themselves. But I think it's something important. I think you could even be. This might be like a little bit radical, but I think you can even bring in some trauma from past lives. I've definitely, in my experiences, dealing with people, sense that some people are kind of almost born with some sort of traumatic death in their previous life, which is kind of affecting how they're working now. So yes, it's a very deep living tradition.
By the way, I've found that to be true with me. My fear of water comes from at least 3 past lives where I died from drowning.
Oh, wow. How did you find that out?
One of them I saw during a past life regression hypnosis session. That was my most immediate past life. I was dared to jump off a bridge as a teenager by some other teenagers, and I stupidly did it. Of course, I'm grateful that it happened because I'm here now in this incarnation. So that was one. And then I learned how to open my Akashic records and asked the record keepers and my guides, shown some images then of 3 other past lives. One where I was drowned, where I was sucked out to sea by the current, and but you know what? It wasn't traumatizing. It was just like watching a movie. It didn't feel, oh, that's me. There I go.
Does it affect how you relate to water now, or
yes,
being
it's
dead?
so much easier. I feel at peace. Yeah, it just simply is now. Yeah, so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing when you're walking this planet. You need to kind of know where you're coming from. I mean, for people who don't believe in past lives, it could even be like an early childhood experience, like until the age of 2, which you have no memory of. You know, the past life really begins, I would say it ends at the age of 2, because you're still kind of ticking over, and that part isn't remembered.
Now, I do know somebody who remembers losing his sibling in the womb with him.
So in case you're wondering where this comes from, in the 16th century was a major center of Kabbalah in Safat in Israel. All the Kabbalists had a belief in reincarnation. The most famous is Rabbi Isaac Luria, who wrote a whole book on it called the Book of Gilgulim, Book of Reincarnation. But Gilgul literally means like recycling. It's just the turning around, which Hebrew is kind of a little bit more simple in the way it describes things, and therefore it's actually kind of more powerful. It's just the recycling of life.
Yeah, what goes around comes around, and if you don't clean up your messes in this life, you don't get a free pass. There's a personal development expression, success leaves clues. Well, I think also not failure, but mistakes and missed opportunities, those leave clues as well, and they could actually leave clues in your body. So you're incarnated and you have this scar or this birthmark on the back of your neck, and that is not by accident. It represents where you maybe were decapitated in a past life. You never resolved that trauma.
Right.
I have all this neck pain, and yes, I have a birthmark there. I have no idea what that relates to, but that's just, what I was born with.
It's a way of understanding the personal relevance of spiritual teachings, because all spiritual teachings are talking about archetypes and energies that are out there in the universe. Jewish spiritual traditions no different. We have 10 sephirot, 10 energies, which are the fundamental building blocks. But people study this and say, well, what's it got to do with me? I mean, how am I connected to one of those in particular? I understand the universe is built on that. So I always imagine that these archetypes are like the sea, and then I'm like a boat on a wave on the sea. So the sea kind of churns up a certain recipe of those archetypes, maybe 1 or 2 in particular, and I'm riding on that, and I'm trying to go like from A to B, but the wave's pushing me another way because my past life experience is kind of the universe pushing me through that wave.
One book that might not seem related to Jewish spirituality, but I believe there is a connection there. It's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Well, we're just coming to understand trauma as a culture and how much of a major role it plays in so many people's lives, even if it's not like the big T trauma, small T trauma, like smaller events, which, I've definitely experienced.
Yeah, anything, I heard this from, I forget where, but anything less than nurturing is trauma. So what would you say is the point of having, let's say, a birthmark or some sort of clue relating to some past life trauma as part of your physicality?
I mean, there was a lecture here in Manhattan a few weeks ago of someone academic who had actually studied this phenomenon of birthmarks being in kind of a residue of previous lives. Definitely a possibility. I think that past life regression or using birth chart readings is the best way to go with understanding past lives. Judaism doesn't have any particular tools of how to work out what your past life. I mean, some people just know. They have a deep knowing.
And also you can develop.
Well, it's also, Judaism would say it's the thing that you're resisting. Because in the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, there's 613 commandments. And the Talmud, which is the ancient rabbinic teaching, says there's one of those 613 that is kind of your personal one that you need to do. Not that you don't need to do, not that the rest are irrelevant, but there's one in this lifetime you need to do. And how do you know what it is? So the Kabbalah said it's the thing you struggle with, because the area of your struggle, with the part of your shadow that you can't own, that is it's going to be hard because you have no experience in it.
Yeah. Actually, let's move on to talking about the Torah. My understanding of the Torah is it's always growing. It's not just the 5 books of Moses. It is including every book that is analyzing the 5 books or is expounding upon some of those books that are written about the Torah. Yeah, I just, another thing that this came to me, that Torah study is studying the mind of God, not just the 5 books. And also
Right.
that I should study Torah for the purpose of cleaving to God. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, there's a lot there. So first of all, Torah is really a conversation. The Torah was given at Mount Sinai in the mouth of Sivan, which corresponds to the astrological sign of Gemini. And the rabbis taught that's because Gemini is twins. So it's like a conversation. It's not like a religion in a sense. Here's the dogma. You have to buy this. Otherwise, you're not part of the religion or you're not going to achieve salvation. It's always being molded by the recipient. So it's not just kind of God speaking and we have to kind of listen. There's a conversation, and the largest Jewish text is the Talmud, which is about 500 years of just conversations about the text and molding their relevance to us. And you kind of feel that the rabbis in the Talmud, that they felt that they're kind of equal partners, or at least junior partners in interpreting the text, and it's not just something which kind of has to be swallowed as a dogma. And in terms of, yes, the mind of God, Judaism looks at the Torah, especially the 5 books of Moses, as a sacred text. Even the Talmud's looked upon as a sacred text, even though it's written by a human discussion. The experience of Torah study is one of a kind of mystical union. In addition to the cognitive content of the words, there's an energetic content of the letters. The Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, who was a 18th century founder of the Hasidic movement, still exists today as a kind of revival of Jewish spirituality. So he taught that when you're looking at the text, don't just look at the meaning of the words, focus on the energetic content of the letters. And he said that there are worlds and souls in the kind of all these lofty energies are circulating, and you can absorb that just by looking at the shape of we're talking about the Hebrew letters, the shape of the Hebrew letters, the sound as it's reverberating from your mouth. Just listen to the raw sound, because when you're reading from a Torah text, you're attaching to something which has divine energy. And therefore, I mean, you said the mind of God, that's another way of putting it. I just like to look at it as a more kind of energetic content. And the beginning of Genesis is God creates the world with language. He creates it with Hebrew sentences. Let there be light. Yehi ar. So basically.
Right. So the Hebrew letters actually existed before creation did.
Exactly. And so the Kabbalah teaches that the letters are really packets of energy. That's what they are. And God kind of wraps himself up in these packets, or bits of God, or emanations of God are wrapped up in the packets, and then the packets create the world. So language is not just a convention of how, why we call a table. There's some reason for it, but it's not particularly profound. But language is really divine energy, especially the Hebrew language.
Yeah. So our soul knows the Hebrew letters and knows Hebrew. And so even if we don't speak any of it, we scan the Hebrew letters of some sacred text, and the energy transfers to us.
Exactly. Nachmanides, who was a medieval thinker of Judaism, he said that the entire Torah is the name of God. The whole thing. Why? Because basically, what is a name of God? It's a particularly high energy set of consonants, so that when you say that name, you're connecting with a much more profound energy than the rest of the text. So he said the whole thing's the name of God. It's all just a bunch of letters, and those letters are packets of energy which somehow capture some of the energy of God. So that's the mystical approach.
Amazing. Now, I'm curious to hear what you think of this, what meaning you bring to this. I've seen Hebrew letters flying around, so I have some third eye sight, and I've seen that over a person before, and I've seen it in other contexts.
Really? What about forehead? Have you seen Hebrew letters on someone's forehead?
I have not.
No.
Have you?
No, I haven't seen any of them. You're the one that's seeing them. Where do you see them? Above the head?
Yeah, floating like
Yeah.
different Hebrew letters floating around above somebody's head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion about this. What I mentioned, Rabbi Isaac Luria from the 16th century, he used to counsel people on this basis. He would, count people in, and he would see letters like somewhere around them. On that basis, understand the person's problems. So it is documented. It's not something I'm not particularly like intuitive in there. I can't sense it. But the Zohar,
Well, we're all psychic, though.
yeah, it's true. It's a muscle you have to develop. The Zohar says that when you go on a journey, I just learned this week. It's fascinating. You're about to go on a journey in the morning. You should look at the morning sky before the sun actually comes up at daybreak. And it says you will see letters in the sky. And if you're really attentive, you will see it's the 42-lettered name of God. So before you get too excited, in the Kabbalistic tradition, there's like hundreds and hundreds of names of God, which is all different kind of energetic formulations. So one of the most powerful one, which according to tradition, God actually used to create the world, has 42 letters. And it says if you're intuitive, you'll be able to see that, and that energy will give you kind of safety during your travels. So there are a lot of recorded traditions about seeing letters, visionary experiences of letters. Yes.
So the 42-letter name of God, that is the basis of the Anabakoa prayer, which I say morning and night, every night, every
yes,
bedtime and in the morning when I'm up and doing my
the
morning
first
connection.
Letter of that prayer, Anabakoa, which is by Rabbi Nechuni ben Akana, who was I think a 2nd century mystic. It's one of the earliest Kabbalistic prayers that we have. So the first letter of each of those words spells the 42-letter name of God. And in some texts, you can kind of they put the letters to look at as well, just of the name itself.
Yeah. So I scan the letters as well as scanning the words of the prayer, pronouncing the words, even though I don't speak Hebrew.
Well, in a way, it's better not to understand Hebrew, because then you can focus on it as the energetic content. If you know what it means, you get lost in the idea of it.
Yeah. And I love your analogy of energy packets or energetic packets. As a geek, that appeals to me because I know all about IP packets.
Oh, the packets in the internet, yeah.
yeah, internet protocol.
Right. I once had that. Wi-Fi wasn't working, so you're lacking packets.
So speaking of the Anabakoa prayer, there are two types of prayers. There's one word for prayer in English, and that's just prayer. But there are two words for prayer in Hebrew. There's the Hebrew word begins with an H. I forget. It's really hard to pronounce, but I'm sure you'll help me with it. That means personal prayer.
Oh, hispalel? Hispalel?
Yes.
Yes.
And the other one is for just traditional prayer. So there's a whole bunch of different prayers that you say when you're, let's say, consuming food or a drink, or you're washing your hands, or you're going to the bathroom, or whatever you're doing, all these different prayers at different times. My understanding is that they're kind of like tried and true frameworks or structures, or almost like standard operating procedures that plug you into the energy of the Creator. Whereas personal prayer is more like I'm just going to wing it and share what's on my mind. If I have something to ask, I'll ask, but it's as much about sharing what's going on for me with with radical candor and humility, and just putting it all out there, listening for the responses from God. I'm curious to hear. So what's the other word for prayer that's the more traditional?
Tefillah? I'm not sure what you're referring to. Yeah.
Yes, tefillah. Love to hear more about that from
yes, I think they're both very important, both personal prayer and using some sort of traditional text. I've prayed to God since I was a young child, just having a personal conversation. I've always found that very profound. My initial reaction to formal prayers is like, I don't want to read some fixed text. I want to talk to God. And I think that sentiment is valid. Actually, if you look in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible itself, Abraham never prays. You never hear him praying. He just talks to God, right? Some of the other, biblical accounts you hear, they pray, they're praying, they're bowing, they're doing some sort of ritual. But he's just like, hey, God, what's going on here? It's like a conversation they have. And when God wants to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, he says, oh, how can I do this without telling Abraham? It's like they have this kind of personal relationship. So I think that's 100% valid. Especially in solitude, which is it's a practice of hisbodedus. Maybe that's what you're talking about. Hisbodedus.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, the
So that's like,
Bodhidut. I
yeah,
could not pronounce that.
yes.
Yes, my wife was trying to teach me that one, and
Okay,
I'm
so that
like,
doesn't actually mean prayer. It means isolation, but it's going into a field, into a space. If you're in a city, I go on, go on the roof, which is a quiet space, and just talking to God, just
yeah, or a
candidly and honestly.
connection, right? It's
Yes,
connection.
yes. And then you have traditional prayers. A lot of people have a bad experience in the synagogue, being too formal and not really connect. I had a bad experience as a child. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it was just not one of connection, one of just what's going on here. So the way I look at the Hebrew prayer book, the traditional prayer book, is first of all, it's ancient. This text, I mean, obviously the prayers of different ages, but some of them are going back a couple of thousand of years. They were written by people who understood the energies of the universe, people who were in touch with the mystical, the magical, the sense of awe of nature. And somehow this has been encoded into the text in a way that there can be tremendous benefit from using something that is kind of so old and so honed. But you have to do it in your own way. You can't just, even people who pray in the synagogue 3 times a day and they're saying that from the prayer book, they have to do it in their own way, because prayer is a personal experience. So you need to find the prayer that speaks to you. You need to find a ritual that works for you. I mean, most people are not reading the whole thing every day. It's very, very long. And what's important is to find bits. You said you read the Anabakoa prayer, for example. The Baal Shem Tov taught it's better to say a little with a lot of devotion than a lot without devotion. It's all about the ability to connect.
Intention, the power
Intention,
of
yes.
intention.
Kavanah in Hebrew, which literally means like direction.
Right, but that determines how far it reaches in the upper worlds. Your prayer,
Yeah, true.
because it can get stuck at the top of the Malhut if you're just trying to show off.
The Baal Shem Tov once went into a synagogue and said, "This room is filled with prayer," and they're like, "Oh, great!" And they said, "No, I mean, it hasn't gone to the heavens. The prayer's still here in the synagogue." So intention is a very personalized thing, and that's why when the Hasidic movement came along, which was a revival of Jewish spirituality, they emphasized that go to the synagogue, but kind of do your own thing there. You don't have to worry about standing up at the right place, sitting down. Just kind of do your own thing, but with the energy of the community, because personal connection is so important.
And what about praying in a group? I know that there's a certain power in having 10 men gathered together in prayer at once, but even just a group prayer. Let's say that there's a hurricane on its way
Right.
to
Yes.
Florida. A group of people praying for that hurricane to change course can change the course of the hurricane.
There is power in communal prayer, because the idea is that there's a bit of God in all of us. So the more you bring together, the more humans you bring together, the more divine presence you have just by manifesting through humans. So that gives the kind of energetic power, a kind of critical mass is reached at a certain point that makes prayer more powerful.
Yeah, but it's important to remember when the lone wolf all the time, and you don't bring in any of your colleagues to help with prayer, and it's very important. Like the psychic medium put out a request to have everybody today at 11:11 a.m. Pray for dissipation or the movement of a tsunami that she saw was going to head to Africa and do a lot of damage and take a lot of lives. Of course, I'll do it. I don't see every email from all these different things that I subscribe to, but I saw that one, and I know none of this is by accident. Everything is on purpose. Everything is divinely orchestrated.
There's something more powerful about physically virtual congregations also good, but there's something powerful about the physically being present together. In the early synagogues, and it still exists, they used to have a side room which is off the main sanctuary, where people who just wanted to pray more at their own speed or do their own thing could do that, but still kind of in the orbit of the congregation. It was called the Cheder Sheni, the second room. And I think a lot of people don't realize you can do that. They think, well, if I go to the synagogue, I got to kind of follow, the fixed prayers. And if I'm on my own, I'll do my own thing. No, you can actually go to synagogue and find a little kind of area and do your own thing there, but you're doing it with the community still. So it lends a certain power.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Yeah. So what would be some of the biggest secrets from your perspective are perhaps transformational or life-changing in the Zohar and the Tanya and these different sacred works?
The Zohar is an ancient text of Jewish mysticism. The main character in the text is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is a 2nd century teacher of Judaism in Israel, just shortly after the destruction of the temple. This is a huge, huge work, which was not very well circulated throughout until the last few hundred years ago. It's a fascinating work. And I would say the biggest secret that's introduced there is that we can influence God, basically, in a nutshell. And I'll explain what that means. That classically, you have Judaism is known as a monotheism. We imagine God as being all-powerful, all-knowing. He's not changeable because he's perfect. So what the Kabbalah does is it accepts that as true, but it paints another layer of divine emanation or divine energy, which is still within God. It's not something that's reached the universe yet. And God emanates within himself. Well, he's not really gendered at that point. It's called the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God. So the infinite generates within itself some finite energies, and they already have colors and shades and qualities, but they're still within God, and they're called the 10 Sephirot, 10 divine energies. And then those divine energies create the universe. And what's radical here, what's a great secret, is that we can actually have an effect on the alignment of these energies. So the Or Ein Sof, the infinite God, you can't really change. It's hard to have a direct relationship with. But what you can have a relationship with is the divine energies. Through our behavior, through human behavior, we can actually reconfigure these energies to be more in alignment, so there's more flow, good flow to the universe. So that's the Zohar's worldview, that we're kind of, the idea of being partners in creation, which is probably a classic idea. You're really a partner because, I don't want to say it too dramatically, but you're changing and affecting the divine, which is, you would imagine that, can't change God, but you're at least affecting the emanations of the divine. The Zohar is really a very long commentary on the Torah, discussing how this idea is implicit in the text itself, interpreting every verse of the Torah through that lens. So the Tanya draws on the tradition of the Zohar. Tanya is much more recent. It was written in 1796 by Rabbi Shneur Zalman, published in 1796 by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. This story about how he was a great empath. When people would come and seek counseling, he would absorb a lot of their pain. He writes this in a letter. And at one point he writes in a letter like, please don't come and see me anymore because I'm just absorbing so much pain. I can't cope. Mm-hmm. And so he had this idea, I'll write a book. This is before the self-help genre existed in kind of Poland and Russia in the 18th century. So he said, I'm going to write a book which tells you what to do so you don't have to come and see me, and which I can't cope with. So he wrote, which is possibly the first self-help book, I don't know, definitely in the Jewish tradition. And he uses the Zohar's idea of the 10 Sephirot as also a picture of the human psyche. Mm-hmm. Because everyone knows the beginning in Genesis, it says that the human was created in the image of God. What does that mean? So the way that he reads it is that just as God has 10 Sephirot, 10 energies, which there's a lot of detail about, that's since we were created in the image of God, we have those 10 energies. We embody those 10 energies. Not too different from like the chakra tradition in Eastern mysticism. There's energy centers in the body. So he really writes what is probably one of the earliest books of psychology. Hasidism, Tanya is the early work of Hasidism, is the psychological turn in Kabbalah. It's using the Sephirot model as a guide to the human psyche. Not arguing with Zohar, it's just adding another layer. Now, interestingly, Carl Jung actually picked up on this. If you read his 80th birthday interview, it's printed. He actually said the following. He says, everything I taught was anticipated by a very wise rabbi, and his name was Rabbi Dovber of Mezrich. And if you open up the Tanya, on the first page, it says, this is the teachings I heard from Rabbi Dovber of Mezrich. So I don't know if he actually saw the Tanya itself or other teachings circulating, because there are some things available in German then, I don't know exactly. But he said this very strong statement that, 100 years before Western psychology starts to blossom, there are these rabbis in Eastern Europe who are really kind of onto similar ideas. And the Tanya was really written as a therapeutic work. He writes in the introduction that basically when people come to see me, I give them advice to solve the problem. So I've just written this advice in a book. It's just a collection of all the different types of advice that I've given people. The reason why I think it was successful is he didn't publish it straight away. He spent 20 years working out kind of what bits of advice work and what bits don't. And then eventually he published it. It was the first book that I discovered. It was about 20 years old. And it totally blew me away because the upbringing that I had was that Judaism is basically a club. And we went to synagogue. But it's just basically, a kiddish, a club. It's a social grouping. I never noticed any interesting ideas, any intelligent ideas. The Torahs were all in antiquated English. I couldn't even read them. And so, okay, it's a club. It has its advantages, its disadvantages. It's basically some sort of social grouping. So when I was looking for the meaning of life in college, I never thought looking Judaism. It's like, I've checked that out. I know there's not a lot of depth there. And then I discovered, first of all, Maimonides, his Guide for the Perplexed, which is actually out there amongst works of philosophy. It's taught in universities, and I was shocked by that. What, a rabbi's written a book they're studying in university? I mean, my rabbi is just talks a load of nonsense. I can't imagine a rabbi. So that kind of woke me up that there's an intelligent Judaism. But then when I discovered the Tanya, it was a combination of psychology, understanding the human condition, understanding struggle, making realistic goals and self-improvement. Philosophical, it has the Maimonidean sophistication, but it was also Kabbalah, which is the mysticism, Jewish spirituality, and it was all integrated together in one system. So I found that very, very powerful. Kind of that led me to devote my life to it. I was not really looking to do this. I wanted to be a doctor, so that didn't happen. I ended up translating Jewish spiritual books and talking about them.
Yeah. Wow, what a difference in the world you're making.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's so nice that you had discovered this book and just invited me to come on the pod. It's a lonely job I just sit in this room. I mean, it's solitary confinement, and I just sit and write, and I know that somewhere someone's reading it. But most people do not reach out and say, I meet people that say, I read your book. I said, did you? Well, they read some other book. I read some book. Did you email the author to say you liked it? No one ever thinks of doing that for some reason. They think.
Oh, I got guided to contact you from above. Yeah. So this is kind of a funny trivia thing. When you were talking about find the answer to life, or however you framed it, but there's a book in the science fiction genre called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
Douglas Adams. Okay, so you know the
cool.
supercomputer.
I grew up on that. It was on BBC Two. The truth is, I had a flashback because when you use ChatGPT, it's exactly the computer they had in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And they asked it, what's the meaning of life? And it says 42.
Exactly. It's the 42
which
letter
is the
name
spiritual,
of God.
which is the, in Hebrew, it's the numerical value of Google, I think. But there's the 42 letter name of God. 42 is an important number in the Jewish spiritual tradition. Yeah.
But I looked up Douglas Adams's inspiration for coming up with 42, and he said he was just looking out in the garden, trying to think of what the supercomputer would answer with after all those millions of years of computing, and it just came to him, 42. Yeah, 42, that'll do. And then he puts it into the book. Yeah, we oftentimes receive information that is coming from above, and we don't realize it. We just think, oh, that just came out of nowhere.
There's a saying for that. It's actually there's a play on Broadway now called The Wanderers. It's about Hasidic Jews and secular Jews and their kind of interactions. I went to see it. So it's based on a Talmudic quote, which they keep saying throughout the play, which I don't know if anyone knew what they're talking about. Ein bal hanes makir benisai, which means when you have a miracle, you don't realize it yourself. The one to whom the miracle occurred doesn't recognize it. So yeah, we're constantly getting vibes from beyond, from the collective consciousness. Yeah, absolutely. 42. He was onto something.
I want to go back to some of the teachings of Judaism that are its kind of core fundamentals, and one of them is Tishiva. It's oftentimes translated as repentance, but in actuality, the word means return. So you're returning to God.
Yes.
And it's very, very powerful. So the Rambam said, I think it was Rambam who said that answer to the question, when should you do Tishiva? And he said, the day before you die. And then the answer was, well, I don't know when I'm going to die. And then every day. Any day you might die. Tishiva incorporates isn't just repenting for your sins, but also a deep sorrow, or I'm not sure if sorrow is the right word, but like humility of like, I'm really sorry. I'm really, really sorry. And to mean it, to really embody that, and also to have the desire, deep desire to never commit that sin again.
Right.
So if somebody cheated on their spouse, they will be tempted. That's a guarantee. They will be presented with a similar or even more tempting opportunity to commit the same sin, because that's how it works.
Yeah, it actually says that. It says that if a person had kind of sinned with someone else, but if you meet that person, the same person in the same place in the same context, and you don't do it, then you know you've done teshuva.
Yeah, so let's talk about Tishiva and how that applies to everyone, not just to Jews, and how it can transform one's relationship with God and with everything and everyone.
Yeah, it's such a powerful idea, and it's so multifaceted, teshuva. I don't know where to start, but the simple meaning is some sort of penitence or asking for forgiveness, a feeling of distance. I think teshuva is a belief. It's not just a way of behaving. It's a belief that if I sincerely want to connect with God and I sincerely regret doing something wrong, then I will be forgiven. Otherwise, we could just hang around forever feeling like, oh, I'm carrying this burden. I'm a bad person. No, you're not a bad person. You might have done a bad thing, but the teshuva will eliminate that bad thing. So it's really a belief in the ability to come close when one has been distant. I like what you said. It means return rather than repentance. So it can kind of mean both, because it's implying that kind of we always want to come home. We want to get back to our essence. We want to be true to ourselves. There's a mystical idea that teshuva is, you could split it into two words. This is toshuv, and then just the H at the end, or hey in Hebrew. Toshuv, hey. So what that means is return the hey. And the meaning behind that is the hey represents Shekhinah. Shekhinah is the divine presence in all things. It's the divine feminine. But it's the way that the divine manifests in the table and a chair and every single thing in the universe. And if we did something that makes us distant from God, what we've done is we've kind of damaged God's name. God's name is spelled, the tetragrammaton is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. So the last Hey of the four-letter name is Shekhinah. And by doing something wrong or that we betrayed ourselves or betrayed someone else, we dislocate that Hey. So we fragmented the name of God. And by doing teshuvah, teshuv Hey, we return the Hey back to God's name. So that is a more kind of sublime way of looking at it. My personal experience is that people in a teshuva mode, they often don't get the message that, like, you know, teshuva's over now. You came back, you're okay now. And they're always kind of again and again and again. And that's why, like I was stressing just before, it's a belief in the reality and the power of forgiveness. Forgiveness really works, both between human and human, between human and God. And so when you've committed not to do something wrong again, and it's a firm commitment, that's it. It takes 1 second to do teshuva. It says in the Zohar, you do it in 1 second, you've done it. It's not like this long thing. You have to, you know, in the olden days, it would sit in a sack, but nowadays we kind of get depressed or feel distant. No, in 1 second, you can make that decision. I'm not going to do that again. And then I have to believe that I'm now close to God again.
And that you're worthy. You're worthy to
yes,
be close to God.
Exactly. Teshuva's coming from a worthiness. And that's why it shouldn't be kind of abused as a glorification of your lack of self-worth. It's like, oh, you know, I'm doing teshuva, I feel so lousy. No, you just you have to work on self-love. Teshuva is not an excuse not to work on self-love.
Yeah.
What it means, it's actually a form of self-love that I'm actually going to credit myself with being okay now that I've decided to shift away from a certain even if eventually I go back to doing it again. I'm not perfect, but for now I've decided I'm not doing this particular thing, and then I want to feel joy that I'm close again.
Yeah. So no beating yourself up. That's not what teshuva is about.
Not too much. A little bit, just a little bit. But we some people are addicted to that. They love beating themselves up.
Yeah. Now I want to go back to something that you said about the Shekhinah, and it's in everything. Yes. And so this is something I learned not necessarily from Kabbalah, but from other mystical texts, that everything has consciousness.
Yes.
Everything. The trash you take out to the curb, the plastic toy that your toddler plays with, everything has consciousness, not just the people that you speak to. And some people don't even really think about their pets or different animals as having, being sentient or conscious, but they are too. And
Yes.
it's quite a mental leap to think, well, that plastic toy my kid's playing with, that has consciousness too. Like maybe he's not making it up when he's saying, like having a conversation with that toy truck. It could actually be talking back to him. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, this is a fascinating idea. And again, it's all over the Jewish tradition. Even Maimonides, who was a rationalist, he was not a mystical thinker. He wrote that the planets have consciousness. Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah. That's actually written up in
Yeah.
the book A Wrinkle in Time, Madeline L'Engle.
Oh, okay.
Have you read that novel?
No, but it's similar to the Gaia hypothesis. But in the mystical tradition, we have this idea that even an inanimate rock, that's the way it's put, has consciousness. This is that you pulled out the Tanya there, but there's actually several books of the Tanya. It's the biggest one, but if you get number 2, it's about this topic, how there's consciousness in everything. The example he gives there is a rock. So I just tell a funny story. The person was translating it. His name is Rabbi Mengel. He's a Holocaust survivor. He's still alive. He lives in New York. So he was translating this book, I don't know, the 60s or the 70s. So it says there that everything has consciousness, not just humans, not just animals, not just the vegetable kingdom, but then in Hebrew, but also inanimate objects. So in Hebrew, the way you say inanimate is doimem, which means silent. So that's actually implying that it has consciousness, but it's just not saying anything, right? Where in English, we use the word inanimate, which is basically has no soul. So that's wrong. It's not inanimate. So when he was translating this, he gave it to his teacher, who was the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was editing it. And so the Rebbe edited it, and he crossed out, you can't put inanimate, because that's the whole point of the book, is to say that a rock has a soul, that a rock has consciousness. And that for that translation, you is kind of going against the whole grain. So you have to put that the rock is silent. And I think it's just a wonderful way of looking at things, that even the things that don't verbally speak to us, they speak to us in other ways. Yeah. The consciousness of the object is the spark of the divine that creates it. And this is one of the fundamental differences between a mystical worldview and the classical worldview in Judaism. The classical worldview is, as it sounds like in the beginning of Genesis, God created a world, and then he kind of sits back. He's like the lifeguard by the pool. He's just kind of sitting there, and if he needs to kind of intervene, otherwise we just let you swim. The mystical understanding is that creation is a constant process. He's constantly saying, let there be light, and all the other statements of Genesis. Because if he would stop pumping the energy into the universe would cease to exist, because being belongs to God. God is being with a capital B. We're being with a small b, and we kind of owe our being to the supreme being. And so this is a constant process. And so in order for even a rock to...
We can't even take our next breath without God willing it to be so.
So the rock is only there because God is giving it energy. So that energy is a form of consciousness, because God is the ultimate consciousness.
Right. And everything is of God. There's nothing that is not of God.
Yes. And this idea now brings God, the presence of God, into the everyday, into the mundane, into the tables, into the chairs, not out of the heavens, but not just in the heavens. Because, Maimonides, the rationalist position was that you can't say anything about God. Because if you say God is great, you're going to imagine, like, what do humans say when they're great? Make America great. That's what you're going to think, right? And that's going to corrupt God with something that is human, right? So well, you can say he's not ungreat's not a word, but he's not stupid. You can't say he's intelligent, because intelligent is something that you associate with humans if you want to be like textbook correct. But what you've actually done is you've distanced God, because now not only If you can't say anything about him, how can you have a relationship with him? So the Hasidic rabbis went in the opposite direction. So God is in a stone in front of you. He's in the river. He's in the tree. Of course, he's in the birds and the animals. So we're living in a universe which is saturated with divine, and you just have to peel away the superficial sensory reading of things to understand that pulsating energy underneath, that's reality. The Zohar, which is this like shelf of mystical texts, okay, which is all about basically how to come to the mystical understanding of God. Page 1, you think, oh, okay, this great book on mysticism. What does it begin with? It's a description of a flower. How many petals it has, what color the petals are, the sepals underneath. It's a meditation on a flower. Because basically, what Rabbi Chaim Miller is saying is you can find God in the flower. You don't have to go any further than that. And actually, flower is such a beautiful thing. It's very easy to find God.
Isn't God within Satan? Nothing is made of anything other than God, because God is all that is. There's nothing outside of God. So Satan is made from God. In fact, I've heard a Kabbalah teacher explain that Satan is a positive angel.
Well, I'm positive. First of all, most people don't know there's a Satan tradition in Judaism. I think it's a purely Christian idea, but it is mentioned in the Talmud and the classic rabbinic texts. It's also mentioned in the Zohar. But the way it's perceived is that the Satan, I'm just going to call it negative energy. Yeah. There are many names for it in Hebrew. It's called the klipa, which means the shell, or the peel, because it's concealing the true inner essence. It's also called the sitra achra, which means the other side. I just call it negative energy because it's more relatable. So what is that doing here? So basically, negative energy is on God's payroll. Excuse the pun. It's a necessary evil. Evil is a necessary evil. Right? So basically,
yeah, because everybody and everything works for God.
We have to, that we need. There needs to be an opposite pull away from good things. Otherwise, we would have no agency. So God is hoping that we go in the positive direction, but he nevertheless has to provide the negative side with some pull in order to give us free choice. But the way it's described, when he gives these energies, negative energies, their salary, the Kabbalah says it's like throwing something behind your back to someone who you hate. You owe them some money. You're going to pay them the money. I won't even look at them. I just kind of. So he's not giving that energy to the negative forces with joy. He really doesn't like doing it. He doesn't like these forces because they're making people bad, but he knows they're necessary. So he kind of throws it behind his back, so to speak. The analogy that's actually given in the Zohar is that a king wants to check the sexual fidelity of his son. So he hires a prostitute to seduce his son to see, because, when he'll become king one day, he'll have these temptations. Will he be able to overcome them? And so you're thinking, what happens? It's not an actual story that happens. It's like, so basically the idea is the king's paying the prostitute and he's hoping she'll fail. But he needs to do it to test the son. So that's really what kind of the Satan, the negative forces. God is hoping these forces won't do their work, but he has to put them in place in order just to give us the ability to own our own narrative, really. We wouldn't own our own story if there was nothing tempting us away from wholeness to our darker side.
Yeah, another way to refer to Satan or the dark side or whatever is the opponent. And this is different from the devil and Christian understanding, correct?
It's not dualistic. It's not that there's no separate power in the Satan outside God. That much I can. I don't know what other traditions exactly how they understand it. But in the pure monotheism of Judaism, they are on God's payroll. That's where I put it.
And where does Gehinnom?
Oh, Gehinnom.
Gehinnom. Where does Gehinnom fit in? Yeah.
Well, it's called purgatory in Victorian English, which means a purge is a cleanse. So if you do a juice detox, it's a detox basically. So what happens is the soul, when it goes through the world, even if a person's really pious and never does, supposing someone that never does anything bad, right? When the soul goes to heaven at the end of their life, it still needs a detox, because the very fact that you're involved in the physical and the mundane takes a toll on the soul, which is very pure. So there's always some level of detox, and the Gehinnom is the more harsher detox, where you get really pushed. It's a bit like, ever seen The Biggest Loser on TV where they really push people? So it's like, you got to really, it's like an intense detox.
I think this is an important concept to convey, that Gehenna is not hell in the sense that most people think of. It's a way to climb the ladder to God.
Yes.
It is a purification
Yes.
step, that if we have gone astray, you do the crime, you pay, you do the time.
The point of the detox is it's for your benefit.
Yeah, it's not forever. You're not damned for eternity. You get a maximum of 12 months.
It's a relatively brief detox process. And so if someone's going on a juice fast, they don't say, "Oh, I'm punishing myself for eating too many toxins." They just have the joy that I'm cleaning my system out, right? So that's really the way I look at it anyway.
It's a refreshing way to look at this terrible concept of hell, because the hell that most people think of doesn't exist.
Right.
It's not eternal damnation with brimstone and fire, and it's run by the devil, and everybody is screaming in agony for eternity because they weren't worthy of being saved.
Right. Well, when you're an author, you imagine that hell is you don't get published and heaven is you get published. That's the way I see it.
Where does self-publishing fit in? Is that purgatory?
It's in the middle of somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, I know we're running out of time here. Wow, there's so much I wanted to go over. We'll have to have you come back. Maybe we could do a part 2 at some point. Last question I'd love to address is this concept of in trauma, you might leave a piece of your soul behind, and that it's not just a new age concept of soul retrieval, being like, oh, I got to retrieve those parts of my soul. That actually comes from Kabbalah. It's Jewish mysticism. So yes. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Before we get to trauma, the idea of the soul being the body is not kind of a one-off thing. You get born and the soul comes in. There are many layers to the soul. And as we go through life, we gradually kind of earn more soul, or earn different layers of our soul. So in Hebrew, you have terms like nefesh, which means the basic body intelligence. And then you have ruach, literally means spirit, but that means more emotional awareness. Neshama means intellectual awareness, self-consciousness, also some sort of spiritual understanding. And then you also have parts of the soul which never come into the body, but they're connected to the part of the soul in your body, like auras around your body, which you also benefit from. So one of those is called chaya, which is the aura basically. And then yechida is something that threads through all of them. It's like the channel of connection, which allows all the parts of soul to connect. So life is really a process of trying to get more soul into your body, or different layers of the soul. So something as tragic and as difficult as trauma is obviously going to set that back. It's actually called soul loss in Judaism. It's more just the lack of the ability to draw the soul into you, like failing to like develop soul body relations properly. So like, and in fact, some of the rituals in Judaism, like the circumcision, the bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, these actually are points, major points in new soul injection into the body. The Sabbath, for example, Shabbat, kept on Friday night, Saturday, is also a time where you get more access to different parts of the soul. So it's most people imagine, if they believe in a soul, they just think, oh, well, you kind of get it when you're born and you lose it when you die. It's not that simple. Life is really trying to make peace between the soul and the body, and to bring more soul into you. So obviously trauma, which is really a kind of freeze, it's a shutdown of part of you, is a very serious soul loss. And, our culture, I would say the last 10 years or so, is just really coming to the consciousness and awareness of how traumatized a lot of us are. And did you see that Prince Harry is actually doing a live with Gabor Mate, who is a Jewish doctor who's an expert on trauma? You know who Gabor Mate is? He wrote
I heard
his recent book is called The Myth of Normal, which is fascinating. Yeah. I read a lot of it.
Yeah, I have it. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah,
but I have it.
And so I think it's this Saturday he's doing a live with Prince Harry to talk about trauma. If they do lives, cool. Maybe it's recorded beforehand. But
yeah.
So yes, this is the kind of every so often something rises to the cultural consciousness. And that kind of shows that it's the work of our generation. I believe that healing trauma is really noticing and healing it is something which is a generational thing that almost applies to everyone. And it's a generational divide. Like our parents' generation, they don't really get that. The post-Holocaust generation was very much kind of, doesn't matter if you lost 3/4 of your soul, just the bit you've got left, just use that, and you'll forget about the rest. That was their attitude, just kind of survival or basic recovery. But today, like especially like my kids' generation, no one's interested in that. They want to feel, they want to own the whole of themselves. It's about wholeness, which is in Hebrew that's shleimut, which is from the word shalom. It's interesting. Peace and wholeness is the same thing in Hebrew. It says after Jacob fought with the angel, he came with shleimus, which means wholeness. That's what we're looking for, to own all of ourselves. And so inevitably, our parents didn't always know what they were doing, and life throws its stuff at us. So all of us have parts of our soul that need retrieving. And through journaling, through meditation, through prayer, through spiritual teachings, we can start to come to that awareness. And the parts that we pushed, it goes back to the Jungian idea of the shadow, and the parts of us we don't like that we've pushed into the shadow, and the need for individuation to kind of own the whole of ourselves. It goes back to that idea, but that itself is really based on the spiritual teachings of the soul, which is originating in the Zohar.
Debbie Ford has that book about shadow work, the dark side of the light chasers.
Yes, she popularized it. Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing too, that you were talking about Shabbat, and that reminded me, like, I had an episode on the show where Joe McQuillan was talking about communicating with his son who passed, and he goes to do this in his son's room, and it seems like 3 a.m. is kind of the best time to get the strongest signal, and he calls it thin places. Shabbat is a thin place. It's a time, of course, but it's where you have more access to the upper worlds than during the rest of the week. So this is a great place to end this episode. Gosh, I just loved this. I want to have you back. So we'll talk about that offline. But if our listener or our viewer wants to learn more from you, of course, we'll give them links to your amazing books, the Practical Tanya, all 3 volumes, and all your other works. But how would they follow you and learn from you besides that?
I have YouTube channel, so a lot of teachings there. All my books are available on Amazon, so if you just go to my page, I have a page on Amazon. It has pages and pages of books, and I try and make them as I'm trying to be like on the cusp between scholarship and just popular works, because I don't want to dumb it down so much that it kind of loses its grandeur. But I also don't want to be so scholarly that it becomes only relevant to a few people. So if you try Jewish text, it could be challenging. I'm trying to reveal the authentic original and make it accessible to people like myself. And I always kind of write for myself when I'm like 16 years old, 20 years old, looking for something meaningful, spiritual, intelligent, but having no background in it.
Yeah, amazing. So your website is rabbihaimmiller.com. And I'll also include links to your YouTube and other social platforms, and to the Amazon pages for your books. So yes, I'll really, really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you so much. Thank you, listener. Go out there and make the world a better place. Reveal some light. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.